I always thought of myself as just your average dog trainer, a little quirky, sure, but nothing out of the ordinary. My days were filled with barking, slobber, and trying to convince packs of overly enthusiastic pooches that chasing mailmen was not a career path. So when an intergalactic dog show recruiter approached me, I figured, why not? A little interstellar fame and glory wouldn't hurt. What I didn't realize was that my unique expertise would land me in the weirdest situation of my life. It all started the moment I stepped off my ship, the Fetcher, onto Canis Prime, a planet run by an alien race called the Canadarians. Picture lanky humanoid creatures covered in fur, with long snouts and tails that wagged like crazy every time someone said the word treat. Their entire civilization revolved around dogs, and I mean that literally. Statues of dogs, temples shaped like bones. It was like stepping into the fever dream of a Labrador fanatic. I was barely off the loading dock when their high priest greeted me with what I assumed was their version of a handshake. It was not. He barked at me, sniffed the air, and said, "Ah, worthy human! You are here to honor the great bark by allowing the sacred entry." "Excuse me?" I stammered, clutching my dog treat pouch like a lifeline. "The dogs will enter you," he declared, as if this was the most normal thing in the universe. Now, I'm not exactly shy, but there's a limit to what a person can handle without clarification. "Look, I don't know what kind of show this is, but I signed up to showcase Earth dog training techniques, not whatever you just said." He ignored me, waving over a group of the most bizarre dogs I had ever seen in my life. These weren't your average mutts. There was one with 3 heads, another with glowing blue fur, and a tiny one that buzzed like a bee when it walked. The high priest gestured dramatically. "Behold, the sacred 10! They will guide you to enlightenment through their divine entry." At this point, I was starting to regret my life choices. The dogs seemed excited enough, wagging tails and yipping like they just found a tennis ball the size of a planet. Then the smallest one bolted toward me, leapt into the air, and wham! Smacked right into my chest, knocking me flat on my back. Before I could recover, the others followed, charging at me like furry battering rams. They barreled into my ship, appending everything in sight. One knocked over my emergency snacks, another jammed its glowing tail into the control panel, and the bee-dog somehow managed to get stuck in the ventilation system. "Get out of there!" I yelled, chasing after them. But it was like trying to herd a hurricane. "Do you feel it?" the high priest shouted from outside, his voice full of reverence. "The sacred entry has begun." I was too busy wrestling a 2-headed dog off my cockpit controls to respond. At one point, I tripped over the smallest one, which had decided to gnaw on my shoelaces, and face planted onto the floor. By the time I got back up, the ship was spinning in circles, alarms blaring as the dogs tore through every corner of my living quarters. "This isn't sacred entry," I groaned. "This is a hostile takeover." The high priest didn't seem concerned. In fact, he looked positively thrilled. "They have chosen you, human. Their entry is your honor." "Great," I muttered, dodging a flying food bowl. "Just what I always wanted, 10 dogs entering me all at once." Eventually, I managed to herd them into the cargo hold, which I locked down with a sigh of relief. But my ship was a wreck, and I was still clueless about what exactly I had gotten myself into. That's when the high priest explained that I wasn't just here to participate in a dog show. Oh no. I was here to prove humanity's worth by allowing these alien dogs to guide me through a sacred trial. "What kind of trial?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "You shall see," he replied cryptically. "The sacred 10 will lead you from behind." I blinked. "From behind?" He nodded solemnly. "It is the way of the great bark. Only through their guidance shall you ascend." I stared at him, then at the dogs, who were now sitting in a row, panting happily like they hadn't just turned my life into a circus. "This is either going to be the best or worst decision I've ever made," I muttered. And with that I agreed to the trial, not realizing just how chaotic, or suggestive, it was about to get. The next part of the ordeal began with the high priest announcing the start of the sacred trial. He called it the Path of Worth. But to me, it looked like the kind of obstacle course you'd see on a bad reality show, except on an alien planet, and about 1,000 times more ridiculous. It was a sprawling maze of slippery walls, flaming hoops, electrified water puddles, and, because why not, a section where you had to dodge flying slime balls launched from alien cannons. And here's the kicker, the 10 alien dogs were supposed to lead me through it. The high priest stood tall, his tail wagging with pride. Trust the sacred 10 to guide you to victory. They shall enter and lead you with their divine wisdom. I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. Right, because these mutts clearly have their lives together, I muttered, glancing at the dogs. One was trying to eat its own tail, another was furiously digging a hole in the ground, and the glowing one looked like it was about to sneeze and set something on fire. Divine wisdom, my ass. The moment the trial began, all hell broke loose. The smallest dog bolted forward, barking like a maniac, and the rest followed in a chaotic stampede. I barely had time to react before they dragged me along, tripping over my own feet as I tried to keep up. We hit the first obstacle, a wall slick with some kind of alien goo, and the dogs didn't even hesitate. One launched itself at the wall, only to slide down in an ungraceful heap. Another tried to climb it, and got halfway up before tumbling backward, landing squarely on me. Great teamwork, guys, I grunted, pushing the dog off. Eventually, they figured out a system. The 3-headed one boosted the smaller ones over while the glowing dog barked encouragement from the sidelines. I, on the other hand, had to climb the wall solo, slipping and sliding the whole way. By the time I made it over, I was covered in goo and questioning every life choice that had led me here. The next section was a series of flaming hoops suspended over a pit of bubbling slime. The dogs took one look at it, and started wagging their tails like this was the best game ever. The smallest one leapt through the first hoop with ease, but the fire-breathing one sneezed halfway through, setting the hoop ablaze and causing a chain reaction. Flames shot up everywhere, and I had to dive to the side to avoid getting roasted. This is not what I signed up for, I yelled, dodging a stray fireball. The dogs, of course, were having the time of their lives. They bounced through the hoops like they were playing fetch, completely ignoring the chaos they were leaving in their wake. Meanwhile, I stumbled after them, narrowly avoiding a face full of slime more times than I could count. Then came the electrified puddles. This part was just cruel. The dogs were small enough to hop from stone to stone, but I wasn't so lucky. The first step I took sent a jolt of electricity up my leg, making me yelp like, well, a dog. The high priest cheered from the sidelines, clearly mistaking my screams for some kind of divine enlightenment. One of the dogs, the inflating one, decided to help by puffing itself up and floating across the puddle. It looked back at me with what I could only describe as smug satisfaction, as if to say, "Why can't you do this?" I resisted the urge to curse at it. By the time we reached the slime cannon section, I was ready to call it quits. The cannons were relentless, firing globs of sticky, green goo that smelled like rotten eggs. The dogs darted through with ease, weaving and dodging like they'd been doing this their whole lives. I, on the other hand, got hit square in the chest by the first blob. The impact knocked me backward, and I landed flat on my back, covered in slime. "Keep going!" the high priest shouted. "You are doing wonderfully." "Wonderful isn't the word I'd use," I muttered, dragging myself to my feet. The dogs barked encouragement, or maybe they were laughing at me. It was hard to tell. The final stretch of the course was a straight shot to the finish line, but of course, the dogs couldn't just run like normal animals. No, they had to make it a spectacle. The glowing one led the charge, its tail lighting up like a neon sign. The smallest one zoomed ahead, barking furiously, while the fire breather added some dramatic flair by setting random patches of grass on fire. I sprinted after them, dodging flames and slime and wondering if this was how I was going to die, chasing a pack of alien dogs on a planet that worshipped them like gods. But somehow we made it. The dogs crossed the finish line in a flurry of wagging tails and triumphant barks, and I collapsed behind them, gasping for air. The crowd of Canadarians erupted into cheers, chanting something about the sacred bond and divine entry. The high priest approached me, beaming with pride. You have done well, human! The sacred 10 have entered you, and you have proven your worth. I wiped a glob of slime off my face and gave him a weak thumbs up. Glad to hear it. Does this mean we're done? He shook his head. Oh no, the trial has just begun. The next phase awaits. I groaned, slumping to the ground as the dogs wagged their tails and looked at me expectantly. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for sure. I was in way over my head. The next phase began in what the high priest referred to as the sacred dog temple, a towering structure shaped like a massive bone. Its entrance was flanked by glowing paw prints, and the walls were covered in carvings of dogs in heroic poses, leaping, barking, and apparently saving the galaxy one wag at a time. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with incense that smelled suspiciously like wet dog, and the floor was padded with something soft and squishy. I didn't ask what it was. The high priest led me to the center of the temple, where a strange, harness-like device was waiting. It looked like a cross between a dog collar and a sci-fi torture device, complete with blinking lights and wires that trailed into a glowing console. The sacred 10 circled the contraption excitedly, tails wagging and tongues lolling as if they'd just been promised a truckload of treats. Behold, the high priest said, gesturing grandly, the device that will complete the bonding process. The sacred 10 will enter your mind and guide you to true enlightenment. I stared at the harness, then at the dogs, then back at the harness. You want me to put that thing on and let these chaos gremlins into my head? Is that even safe? It is the way of the great bark. The priest replied solemnly. Fear not, human. The sacred 10 shall guide you from within. From within? Great. That's not ominous at all. The dogs barked eagerly, clearly on board with the plan. Before I could protest further, the smallest one, who I'd started calling Pipsqueak, jumped up and shoved the harness into my arms. Reluctantly, I strapped it on, wincing as the wires snapped into place. The moment the last clip locked, a surge of energy coursed through me, and my vision went white. For a moment, I thought I'd passed out. Then I realized I was still standing, but everything felt different. I could hear the dogs, not barking, but talking. Their voices echoed in my mind, a cacophony of excitement, curiosity, and what sounded suspiciously like laughter. Finally, one voice said. I've been dying to get in here. Plenty of room, another quipped. A bit messy, though. Focus, you mutts, a third voice barked. We have a mission. I clutched my head, overwhelmed by the noise. What is happening? The bonding is complete, the high priest declared, throwing his arms in the air. You are now one with the sacred 10. One with them? Oh no. I didn't sign up for this. The dogs were in my head, and I could feel everything they felt, their hunger, their excitement, their endless, chaotic energy. It was like hosting a 10-way tug-of-war in my brain, and I was losing. This is a nightmare, I muttered, stumbling forward. Relax, human, one of the voices said. You'll get used to it. Used to it? There are 10 of you in here. How am I supposed to think? Thinking's overrated, another chimed in. Let's go chase something. Before I could respond, my legs started moving on their own. The dogs were in control now, and they were having a field day. I stumbled around the temple like a puppet on strings, jumping, running, and, at one particularly humiliating moment, sniffing the air like I was tracking a squirrel. The high priest watched with unbridled enthusiasm. Yes. Yes. The bond is strong. Strong? It's chaos, I yelled, tripping over my own feet. The dogs didn't seem to care. They were too busy exploring my senses, poking and prodding at every corner of my mind. At one point, one of them found a memory of my last date, a disastrous night involving spilled wine and a very angry cat, and replayed it for the others. The laughter that erupted in my head was deafening. Stop digging through my memories, I shouted. That's private. But it's funny, Pipsqueak said, giggling. You humans are so awkward. I was about to argue when a strange sensation washed over me. It was a mix of warmth, loyalty, and an unshakable sense of joy. The dogs weren't just invading my mind, they were sharing theirs. I could feel their love for me, their unwavering trust, and their boundless enthusiasm for life. It was overwhelming. "See?" one of them said softly. "We're not so bad." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "You're still driving me crazy." "Crazy is fun," another replied, wagging their mental tail. The high priest clapped his hands, drawing my attention. "Now that the bond is complete, it is time for the final stage of the trial. The sacred 10 shall guide you to victory, and you shall prove your worth to the great Bach." I groaned, already dreading whatever fresh hell awaited me. But as I looked at the dogs, who were now sitting patiently and wagging their tails in unison, I couldn't help but feel a tiny spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could pull this off. Or maybe we'd all go down in flames. Either way, it was going to be one hell of a ride. The final phase of the trial began with the high priest announcing the ultimate challenge, a synchronized performance to display the divine bond between human and dog. The crowd of Canadarians gathered around the sacred arena, their tails wagging and ears perked in anticipation. I stood in the center, still reeling from having 10 dogs bouncing around in my head. The dogs, meanwhile, were more excited than ever, their collective enthusiasm practically vibrating through my body. "Okay, team," I muttered under my breath. "If we're going to survive this, we need a plan." "Plan? Who needs a plan?" Pipsqueak chimed in. "Let's just wing it." "No," I snapped. "No more winging it. Winging it got us electrocuted and covered in slime. This time, we do things my way." The dogs grumbled, but eventually agreed. One of them, the three-headed one, spoke up. "Fine, human. What's your plan?" "Simple," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We keep it flashy, keep it chaotic, and most importantly, we keep them entertained. They're not looking for perfection, they're looking for a show." The dogs perked up at that. If there was one thing they loved, it was being the center of attention. The performance started with a bang, literally. The fire-breathing dog let out a dramatic plume of flames, igniting a ring of torches around the arena. The glowing dog followed, using its bioluminescent tail to create a dazzling light show. The crowd erupted into cheers, and I allowed myself a small smile. So far, so good. Next came the tricks. The three-headed dog balanced on a ball while the bee-dog buzzed around it in circles. Pipsqueak jumped through hoops, barking triumphantly every time it landed. The Canadarians loved it, their cheers growing louder with every stunt. For a moment, I almost forgot about the chaos in my head. Almost. "Don't get cocky," I muttered, mostly to myself. The dogs, of course, took that as a challenge. The inflating dog decided to show off by puffing itself up to an enormous size, only to accidentally bump into the fire-breathing dog. A jet of flame shot out, narrowly missing the glowing dog, who yelped and darted out of the way. The bee-dog, startled, veered off course and crashed into the three-headed dog, sending them both tumbling to the ground. The crowd gasped, and I felt my stomach drop. This was it. We were done for. But then something incredible happened. Instead of panicking, the dogs turned the mishap into part of the act. The fire breather lit up the fallen ball, turning it into a glowing orb, while the glowing dog used its tail to create a halo effect. The three-headed dog jumped back up, balancing the orb on its noses, and the bee-dog circled around it like a comet. It was messy, chaotic, and completely unplanned, but it worked. The Canadarians went wild, their cheers echoing across the arena. I could feel the dog's pride radiating through the bond, and despite myself, I couldn't help but laugh. They might have been a handful, but they were my handful. For the grand finale, I decided to take a risk. "All right, team," I said. "Let's give them something to remember." The dogs didn't need any further instructions. They sprang into action, forming a pyramid in the center of the arena. The fire breather climbed to the top, letting out a final, spectacular burst of flames, while the glowing dog lit up the entire structure with a radiant golden hue. I stood in front of them, arms raised like a ringmaster, and shouted, Behold, the Sacred Ten! The arena erupted in applause, the Canadarians chanting something I didn't understand but assumed was praise. The high priest approached, his eyes wide with awe. Never before have we seen such a display of divine harmony, he said. You have truly proven yourself worthy. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. So, does this mean we're done? The priest nodded. You and the Sacred Ten have completed the trial. You are now one with the Great Bark. Great, I said, exhaustion finally catching up to me. Can I go home now? Of course, he said. But know this, you are always welcome on Canis Prime. You and the Sacred Ten are heroes. As the crowd continued to cheer, I led the dogs back to my ship, where they promptly resumed wreaking havoc. One of them knocked over a crate of supplies, while another chewed through a control cable. I sighed, too tired to care. You know, I said, flopping into the pilot's seat, I'm going to miss this. The chaos, the insanity, even the weird psychic bond. Miss it? One of the dogs said. You're stuck with us now, human. I blinked. Wait, what? We're coming with you, Pipsqueak said cheerfully. You didn't think we'd just stay here, did you? Before I could respond, the glowing dog hit the launch button, sending the ship hurtling into space. I grabbed the controls, trying to steady the ship as the dogs barked and howled with excitement. Great, I muttered. Just great. 10 dogs entered my life, and now they're never leaving. The dogs laughed, their voices echoing in my head, and despite myself, I couldn't help but smile. Life was never going to be the same, but maybe that wasn't such a bad thing after all.